so today we're going to talk about how to minimize your risk to having a tenant that comes in that doesn't have any rental credit history. George Pino, my business partner, is here to walk us through and tell you all about the glorious problems we've had in our history with apartment buildings, and we've had some doozies. Yeah, over the years. Actually, we don't have any multifamily right now. We've sold it all off. We got some incredible offers on it now. We've been focused on triple net, but we do plan on the future going back to owning some multifamily, and we look forward to it. But what we're going to give you today is some tips that we use to help us get through this process when somebody comes in and they don't have credit history. And it worked very well for us. So if you like what you see today, make sure you subscribe. We're going to save one of the big ones for the end, I think. Let's do that. Okay. Make sure everybody watches the whole video. Okay, so let's dive right in. Number one thing that we learned early on was when you find somebody that doesn't have any credit, is to really have a conversation with them. And I think that's probably the most important thing. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. You know,
find out why.
Find out why. I mean, I think the why is just as important as what is actually happening. I mean, there's a lot of instances, everybody, you know, we're all humans, so we're not perfect.
That's debatable.
So, well, yeah, that is debatable for some, but generally speaking, we're all humans, we're not perfect, so we all have made mistakes in our past at some time. Some more than others. Yeah. So, what you have to remember though is that, you know, if for some reason you might have a college student that came in that either has no credit or very little credit, or the credit they have may be all negative. What we have to remember is that, you know, a lot of credit card companies can be target young college students, you know, and they offer them credit, and then a lot of these kids never have experienced the use of credit and don't know how to do it, so they get over their heads and they're paying 19% interest. They didn't even realize it, that's a bad interest rate. They just thought that's what it is.
I got nailed by it. My first credit card was a Woolworth card.
I think I had a JCPenney one.
Yeah, so I mean, they targeted it.
Yeah, they
would go there and
they
spend money?
Set booths up right in front in the commons. So, you know, so a lot of times those kids may have issues as far as with their credit because they didn't know what to do, but then they've corrected it, and you know, they paid everything off. Credit may be clean, or they may be making payment plans to it, but the negative credit still shows up. So ask why. Just because someone has negative credit doesn't mean that they're a bad risk right now. It's just something that happened in the past, but you really need to vet out why. So, you know, communication, I think, is definitely key, and I think that along with everything that we're going to talk about today, it really boils down to communication.
Sure. Yeah. Secondly, let's go with, I think, proof of income would probably be the next best.
Absolutely. You know, you want to make sure that the tenant has the ability to pay the rent in a timely manner, that they're not necessarily going to be living paycheck to paycheck, hand to mouth.
How long have they been at the job?
How long they've been at their job. Is the job stable? What type of job? Is it
not a contract job?
Is it easily replaceable as well? In case something happens with that company, can they easily move to a different company or just?
Or if they jumped.
Or if they jumped jobs, absolutely. And more importantly also, if they are new, a lot of times I've seen where, you know, a student that just graduated may be offered a job position, and it's only for a year or 2 years. So you want to make sure that that's in place, that you know what's happening, what's going on with their whole work situation.
Right.
All right, so let's talk about, now this can get a little hairy here, so we got to kind of dive into it a little bit deeper, but taking a deep look into the background check. So now I know there's certain guidelines you have to follow with looking at the background check. So now, when it comes into criminal history?
Criminal history is definitely a little bit of a touchy subject for some people, but I think it's also a good thing to do when you are looking at potential tenants, but you have to make sure that what you're looking at, number one, make sure you're not violating any of the fair housing laws.
Because there's some cities are restricting using it.
Some cities and some states are restricting the use. They're putting limitations on what you can actually deny a potential resident tenancy at your building. You know, it really has to be something that is in line with the actual tenancy. That could be a violent crime, it could be robbery, it could be theft, it could be fraud. But if it's something like a drunken disorderly in public, it may not be
When they were in
wise
college.
to, yeah, especially when they're in
Yeah.
college. But you know, there's all kinds of things that you want to look at, or for that matter, it could be a felony reckless driving. Does that really impact you if they're a good tenant or not? Probably not.
If it's happened multiple times, it could be a problem.
It could be, absolutely. I
A
mean,
one-off.
absolutely,
I
absolutely.
mean, you've got to keep an open mind here and really don't be judgmental. You know, really keep an open line. And this goes back to communication.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've got to talk about, well, what happened here?
Well, also what I would like to talk about is, you know, part of that communication is not just between the tenant and the landlord or potential tenant and you as the landlord, but also the communication that you have with when you're vetting them out. When you talk
Right.
about background checks, you know, it's not just the criminal background checks, but if you're doing the employment check we talked about earlier, don't just ask for the paycheck stubs. Actually call the employer and verify them.
Yeah, landlord references you've got to do them.
That too, absolutely. Landlord references, you know, and make sure that you have a list of questions that you want to ask, you know, and one of the ones that I always ask that, or used to ask, and it throws people for a loop a little bit is, are you the owner of the property?
Well, we got caught a couple times. So,
and there's a reason.
yeah, well, let's tell you a quick story. So we rented out actually a couple of apartments, and they were one of them was to family members. They were that they put on as a landlord reference. So watch out for that. One was a cousin at one time.
Yep.
So make sure that it was actually a previous landlord or a property management company. Make sure you verify that.
Yeah. Absolutely, and you know the other thing I've seen also is you know, then the excuse is, oh, I'm living with my parents, they're my landlords.
Right.
If you're not paying rent, they're not your landlords.
Yeah.
So make sure that you get a good landlord reference and follow up with it. So that's one thing as far as the communication, but also you know, and the questions to ask landlords can be everything from, you know, did they pay rent on time, like you
Yep.
mentioned, the financial stuff, but also, did you receive any complaints from any other tenants or any other neighbors?
Yeah.
You know, noise complaints, issues with pets, dogs, pets especially.
Yeah. Any community
any kind.
violations.
You
Absolutely,
want to ask that.
absolutely.
But the paying the rent on time is the key. Now, let's say you vetted them all out and you're just not sure. How do you feel about an increased deposit? I think that's a good way to go. But you got another guidelines for your city and state.
Absolutely. No, the increased deposits are a fantastic way to mitigate the risk that's associated with a tenant without credit. And there are many ways that you can do this. But, you know, like you said before, really understand the local municipalities and the state laws and regulations regarding what you
Yeah.
can charge for a security deposit. Also, make sure that if you are going to charge more than 1 month of rent as a security deposit, that you don't call it last month's rent. Or no
Well,
security deposit
let's
should
touch
ever
on
be
that.
called last
Because
month's
some
rent.
people say deposit, some people say first and last month's rent. And then they get mad when that tenant says, oh, I'm just going to use that as my last month's rent when
Right.
it's actually a deposit.
Exactly.
Make sure that's clear in your contract. You've got to
Yeah.
really spell that out, because if they come in and now you can't use a deposit, there's the last month's rent, and some of them will still try and do that, I guess.
Yeah. Some will still try and do that, but then you have actual recourse against them if they do. But if you call it first and last month's rent and you don't
Yeah.
call it a security deposit, you don't have a security deposit. You have
Right.
the first and last month's rent.
Right.
So really, that's,
Yeah.
you know, you want to make sure that it's worded correctly, but you're also abiding by the laws. You know, for instance, California limits the amount of security deposit that you can charge on residential properties to 2 months or 3 months if it's fully furnished.
Yeah.
So that's something to take into consideration, you know, where they are there. If they can't afford it, or even if you have some other issues, you know, something to take into consideration possibly is a cosigner.
Yeah.
That's great, but I tell you what you have to remember to do, and we were always really good about this, is make sure you qualify the cosigner as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we've seen credit where the cosigner was actually worse than the actual tenant, so wasn't a good situation.
Yeah, no, you want to make sure that you follow the same guidelines and the rules that you have for your vetting out process for your tenant as you do for the cosigner. Make sure that they are qualified, that they can afford to pay the rent if they need to, because otherwise, you know, if they really can't afford it, it doesn't matter if they're cosigning.
Yeah.
If they have bad credit as well, that could be a potential issue as well.
Yeah.
So those are things to definitely take into consideration. Make sure you vet it out, and you know.
Well,
And I want to close with one thing, and that's make sure you vet everybody the same.
Absolutely. You know, the guidelines, you know, the easy guidelines to remember is that treat everybody the same and don't make any decision that is based upon race, religion, or sexual preference, or, you know, anything that's protected under the law. None of those should even be asked as far as questions go.
right.
Really, it's all about the numbers and the credit, but then the background information. You can ask the background information on any of that stuff.
Yeah. So,
All right, well, George, thank you for coming in. Guys, thank you for tuning in today. If you haven't done so, please do just subscribe. And I know we went on a little bit long here today, so if we've given you a lot of information, too much information, you can reach out and ask questions. We'll clarify it, and so don't hesitate to reach out. All right, thank you. We'll see you again next week.